Hey guys, how's it going? This is Seth from REtipster.com. In this video, I want to give you a thorough overview of a website called Foreclosure.com. So I remember back when I was first getting into real estate, many years ago now, and just the word foreclosure was like this buzzword. It was supposedly a type of property where I could get really good deals on it, buying them directly from a bank or, perhaps buying it at an auction. Really just getting properties where the owner had failed to make their mortgage payments and they lost the property, and now I could get it for a great deal. So it was a great opportunity to possibly get a lot of free equity and make a lot of money in the process. But I remember one of the things that I had a really hard time with, and something that would have made the process a lot easier, was having like a one-stop shop of like where to find these opportunities. Instead of going to 10 different websites and having to call banks directly or try to root out the properties on Zillow or something like that. I mean, if there was just one place where pretty much every single listing was some kind of great opportunity, it would just be great to go to one place and know that it was all there. And that's basically what Foreclosure.com is. So in this video, I want to explain to you really how the website works, how you can use it, how you can go about finding opportunities on this platform. But also in the process, I want to help you understand a lot of the differences and nuances between things like a pre-foreclosure versus a foreclosure versus a sheriff's sale versus a short sale or a bankruptcy or a city-owned property. All these things are different from each other, but some of them have a lot of parallels and sort of overlap in a way. So I just want to help you understand what the differences are, and once you find those kind of properties on this site, how you can go about contacting the right person and possibly putting a deal together. And before we get too far down the road, I should also let you know we do have an affiliate relationship with Foreclosure.com, and we actually have a discounted link if you want to get a discount on the service. All you got to do is go through our affiliate link. We earn a really small commission through that. It's mostly your benefit, honestly. So just retipster.com/foreclosure, and you can check that out. But assuming you do want to check it out, I'm just going to give you a really thorough overview of the site and help you understand what you're looking at as you're going through this. Because I know when I was first going through this site, there were a lot of things about it that weren't totally clear to me. I was trying to make sense of different things that weren't, overly apparent. And I actually had an hour-long phone conversation with the people at Foreclosure.com, and they cleared a lot of this up for me. So now that I understand it pretty well, I want to make sure you understand it too. Just to get things started with, we're going to go check out pre-foreclosures, because as you can see right here, that's what there seems to be the most of on this site. So you can either start by clicking right here on pre-foreclosures, and then that's going to take you to this directory where it shows you every single state, or you can go ahead and just click on the state itself and go about it that way. So let's go ahead and click on Ohio. And as soon as you get here, you're going to see all the major cities in Ohio. And as you hover over each city, you can sort of see the numbers change over there on the left, showing how many of each type of listing there is in each city. So just say if we're going to go ahead and click on Toledo, for example, it brings up this map that kind of has a similar look and feel to something like Zillow or Redfin or Trulia or Realtor.com. Same kind of concept, but the way that you can filter these listings, aside from the normal ways of sorting it by price or bedrooms or bathrooms or that kind of thing, is to go up here to listing type. And in this case, we're going to look at only the pre-foreclosures so that we see those. And we can also filter it by property type if we want to. And they give us, just a handful of options. And I just want to explain really quickly what a pre-foreclosure is and how that differs from a sheriff's sale and a foreclosure, because they're all sort of related, but they're definitely different things. So it's helpful to understand what those differences are and how that affects you as a real estate investor who's trying to find these kinds of deals. So if we go ahead and just click on any one of these things right here, it starts by showing us some basic information about the property. And we can go down here, we can see where it's at in the foreclosure timeline. And basically what's going on in a pre-foreclosure listing is this is the period of time between when the lender issues a notice of default until the actual auction when they try to sell this property. And essentially what happens is, when a borrower stops paying their loan payments, the lender will send them a notice just saying, hey, you're late on your payments, and if you don't bring these payments current by this date, you will lose your property. And when a property is in this pre-foreclosure stage, the homeowner still owns the property, they're still in full control of the property, and they can get caught up on payments and get out of it if they want to. So the nice thing about these kinds of listings is that if you wanted to, you could actually reach out to the homeowner directly and try to negotiate some kind of deal and buy it directly from them. In a lot of cases, that official notice of default is sent out when that borrower is 3 months behind on their mortgage, and then the auction happens 3 months later. So that's like 6 months total from when the borrower stopped paying to when the property is officially taken from them. The nice thing about Foreclosure.com is that it tells you pretty clearly when that notice of default was issued. So in this example, Foreclosure.com tells us the exact date when the owner was issued the notice of default, and it also tells us the exact date of when the foreclosure sale is scheduled to happen. So one interesting thing about this particular listing we're looking at is that this is actually a sheriff sale. And this was something that I needed a little bit of explanation on at first, because a sheriff sale actually is a pre-foreclosure. The difference between that sheriff sale label and just a regular pre-foreclosure label on this site is that the sheriff sale is where there's an auction date on the calendar and it's coming up within the next 3 weeks. And this is the stuff that's basically about to come up for auction. For most intents and purposes, a pre-foreclosure and a sheriff sale is basically the same thing. It's just that a sheriff sale has an auction that's like just around the corner, whereas the pre-foreclosure is quite a bit earlier in the process still. It's also important to note that a lot of areas around the country have what's called a redemption period, where the owner can actually come up with the money and get the property back after the property is auctioned off, and or after the property officially goes into foreclosure and is just owned outright by the bank. And typically the owner has up until the morning of the auction to make the situation right, but it can potentially even go beyond that. So that's just worth keeping in mind, and it's something to understand about how your state works if you decide to get involved in all this kind of stuff. So if we go back here to this page, let's go ahead and pick on another one here just to see what this one looks like. And it looks like this is another one where there's an actual auction date on the books. And in most cases, part of why it's so helpful to subscribe to something like this website is because it'll actually give you the contact information of who you can reach out to and talk to about actually purchasing the property. Whether that's the real estate agent, the bank, the local county sheriff's department, it gives you something to work with. It's not always going to give you like an outright phone number or email address, but it will at least give you enough to get started and start exploring further and trying to find these people's contact information. So in this case, since it's a sheriff sale, they give you the sheriff department's phone number, or you can email it. There's also this pretty helpful thing over here if you ever want to understand more of the basics of how to pursue this particular type of listing, depending on what type of listing it is. It explains that all pretty well. If we go back here, so when we go over here to this listing type thing, the next listing type I want to show you is not the pre-foreclosures, but the foreclosures. I also want to just explain a little bit more about what these things are beneath it. So a foreclosure is when the property has gone through this whole pre-foreclosure and sheriff sale auction process. However, people didn't bid enough or didn't bid at all. So the bank just took the property back in lieu of the auction. And when I mentioned that stuff earlier about the redemption period in some states, Foreclosure.com doesn't deal much with the legal definition of foreclosure and where it's at in that redemption process, if it's subject to that at all. All they can do is just tell you whether or not it's labeled as a foreclosure. So just keep that in mind. I just want to reiterate, it's up to you to figure out whether there's a redemption process in the state you're working in. Most of these foreclosure listings, if you click on one of these, are going to have the real estate agent's contact information. And the reason that's there is because pretty much all the time, a bank is not going to try to sell this property on their own. They're just going to hand it off to a realtor and let them take care of that for them. So if you do want to purchase one of these properties, all the contact information is there in terms of who you can contact and how you can get a hold of them. You'll see a short property description, a lot of the same basic details that you would see on the other types of listings. And apparently Foreclosure.com, at the time of this recording anyway, currently works with another website called auction.com, and some of these foreclosure listings come from them. So it's just worth noting that some of that information is going to be coming from that other separate source. And something else worth explaining is that there's actually a couple different kinds of auctions. There's the pre-foreclosure auction with the sheriff's sale, where it's still in the hands of the homeowner up until the thing is sold. And there's also a separate kind of auction just called a foreclosure auction, where it's owned by the bank and they just choose to auction it off rather than handing it over to a realtor and letting them do their thing. So sometimes when you look at these foreclosure listings, you'll actually see like an auction date in here or down here, and that's not because it's a pre-foreclosure, it's because it's just a foreclosure auction that's being sold that way rather than going through a realtor. So if you don't see a realtor's contact information, it's probably because it's going to be auctioned off rather than sold through an agent. So when we go back to this map here, now under this foreclosure thing, you'll see, HUD, $100 down, and shadow inventory. So like, what does all that mean? Well, HUD properties are basically a subset of foreclosures, and you can segment them out on the map like this. The main difference is that HUD foreclosures are owned by a government agency, not a bank. So if somebody got a government loan and then defaulted on that type of loan, that means it's a HUD foreclosure, not a bank foreclosure. And if you want, you can separate out those specific types of foreclosures just by clicking on that particular item. So I actually thought this was a little confusing in terms of how the site works because, we've got HUD in foreclosures checked here. I'm trying to just see the HUD ones, and it says there's 7 of them. Yet over here, I'm seeing a lot more than that. And I'm not sure if the HUD foreclosures are these black pins or the red pins or these like light blue teal pins. I'm not really sure which ones they are. So it's just a little confusing. But if we did want to find those HUD foreclosures and only those HUD foreclosures, let's see if we keep trying to click on this, if it'll do that for us. And it doesn't look like it will, but I think it's these ones right here. So if we click on those and open these things up, yep, this is a HUD home. So down here, it'll tell us, the contact information of who to get a hold of if we want to pursue that one. Pretty much the same as all the others in terms of just offering up that information. And then the next thing on the list here is $100 down. And this is referring to the FHA's $100 down program, which is basically a sales incentive that permits a borrower to purchase a HUD REO property with FHA insured financing with a minimum down payment of $100. So if that's something you're looking for, there is a way to filter down just by those properties. And then shadow inventory is when a property first goes into foreclosure after the pre-foreclosure auction. However, they haven't had an agent assigned to it yet. And it's also possible that these properties could be in the middle of the redemption period. So that's sort of what is implied in that shadow inventory label. And some investors like to target these kinds of properties because they can talk directly to the bank before it goes to the agent. So if you have some kind of a relationship with that bank already, or if you know how their systems work, it could be advantageous to go down those avenues rather than trying to deal with a realtor who doesn't know you. And speaking of HUD foreclosures, I know there's a really popular website called HomePath.com where you can find a lot of, Fannie Mae foreclosures and that kind of thing. And HomePath listings are included in Foreclosure.com. And one way to tell whether you're looking at a HomePath property is to look at the detailed description, in which they would note that these listings are from Fannie Mae, because all HomePath properties are from Fannie Mae. So if you're a fan of HomePath.com, then Foreclosure.com will most likely be your friend as well. And then moving on down the list to short sales. So just a quick explanation of what short sales are all about. So it's basically a pre-foreclosure, and the bank has agreed to sell the property at a lower price if the buyer meets certain terms. So they're basically saying, okay, borrower, you owe X amount on your mortgage, but if this new buyer meets this certain criteria and is willing to abide by these terms, we're willing to sell the property for less than that loan amount and take a loss on it, simply because that's a lot easier than making this property go through foreclosure and all the hassle that comes with that. So the bank is basically cutting their losses if they can find the right buyer to come in and basically bail them out. And if you want to find these short sale properties, It's really easy to do that. You can go through the process I just did there from the home page, or you can go up here wherever you're at and just select the short sale option, and it will just display those for you. You can go ahead and click on them and get all the information you can about them. Most of the time these short sales are going to be listed by a realtor, so they will have that information right down here at the bottom, and you can go ahead and pursue more about the property that way. Now, the next type of listing I want to show you here is the bankruptcy listings on foreclosure.com. And I didn't realize this at first when I first started going through this website, but bankruptcy listings are really like the trickiest type of listing on this site. So if I go ahead and just click on this one, for example, it's going to show me some basic details. It's going to show me the owner's name, not necessarily like outright contact information, but I can at least, take that owner name and look up more on a service like DataTree, for example, and find their mailing address wherever they happen to be. And it also tells you what type of bankruptcy they've filed for and the case number and the filing date and all that stuff. But the reason these are such tricky listings is just because you happen to see one of these listings on foreclosure.com does not necessarily mean the property is for sale. All it means is that somebody who listed this as their home address has filed for bankruptcy. So, for example, this could be somebody who is a tenant at the property. Maybe they don't even own the property, but they happen to be going through bankruptcy. Those are the kinds of situations that could lead to a property listing labeled bankruptcy showing up on this site. The house itself may have nothing to do with that bankruptcy. It also depends on the type of bankruptcy that was filed, like Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13. And a bankruptcy court case could take up to 2 years to go through. So it's really not a quick process, even if you do happen to find a great deal on here from somebody who does own it and does want to sell it. When I first heard about what a hassle all this stuff is and how complex and complicated it is to go after these kind of deals, my first question for the guys at foreclosure.com was like, why do you even include these listings on your site if it's so confusing and convoluted? And the reason they do it is because there are investors out there who specialize in going after these kinds of deals. So just because they're pretty confusing for the average person to figure out and get to the bottom of doesn't mean there's not opportunities here. So if you want to deal with all that mess, bankruptcies could be exactly what you're looking for, but for a lot of people, it's not like the lowest hanging fruit that's the easiest to get, simply because there's so many different steps and complexities to these kinds of deals. So if you are interested in these kind of deals, I'd say the best first step is to legally check on the property and see where it is in that bankruptcy state. Like check through the county courthouse or check with a real estate attorney, run a title search to make sure there's not any other outstanding debt or lien holders on the property, because in many cases there will be. So just make sure you're going through all those proper channels and pre-steps before you get too deep in these types of properties. And speaking of listings that are kind of confusing and convoluted, the next one on the list here is city owned. These can be great deals, but part of what makes these types of listings so difficult to figure out is there's a whole variety of programs around the country that each city and even county and municipality offers. And you have to take a look at each program to see what the details are of how to actually buy these properties. So for example, if you go ahead and click on Flint and then click on one of these listings, so you're going to see all the basic information. You're going to see how many days it's been on the site, parcel number, all that basic stuff, the contact information. And in this case, probably what's happening is the local county here owns this property, and there's some process you have to go through in order to buy it from the county. And that's 100% speculation on my part. I have no idea the specific details of how you can actually buy this property. But what it does give you here on foreclosure.com is the contact information for whoever you need to talk to find out more information. And in a lot of cases, they'll also give you an additional information link. So for example, if we go here and click on city owned, make sure those are the only ones we're going to be seeing. Okay, so if we click on this one, and this one is a parcel of land, and in this case, you can either email the Michigan Land Bank or you can click here for additional information, and that will bring up the actual website where you can hopefully find out even more. As you can see in this example, you would have to click here to apply for this property and jump through some hoops to find out more, I'm sure. So, part of what makes these city-owned listings so confusing is because there's just a ton of different programs out there, and you never know exactly what you're dealing with until you click on this, find out more information, and then figure out what the next steps are, if it's even something that you can do. If you are looking for those kinds of properties, or say if you're already familiar with whatever that city-owned program is in the area where you're working, foreclosure.com can be a pretty easy way to narrow down only those properties and focus in on those. And then if we go back here and check out these other ones, so rent to own, as is deals, and fixer uppers. So these kinds of listings, in my own humble opinion, are probably the least notable on this site, because I think a lot of people who use foreclosure.com are looking for foreclosures. And none of these are foreclosures. They're just potential opportunities where you can get deals for one reason or another. So for example, a fixer-upper or an as-is deal, the reason these are showing up on this site is most likely because the words fixer-upper or as-is are appearing somewhere in the description of the property. And that's pretty much the only metric I'm aware of that makes the properties show up in this section of foreclosure.com. And the reason foreclosure.com does this is simply because these properties are being sold as is, or they need help in some way. And it just represents a big segment of all the listings out there that could potentially be great deals. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, those are included in foreclosure.com. Probably not the most targeted or ideal metric if you're looking for foreclosures at large, but still, you might find something there. And then also the rent to own listings, just a quick explanation on that. So these kinds of listings are actually like super popular right now, and there aren't that many properties on the market that are specifically marketed this way. But I mean, in reality, any property could be turned into a rent to own if you can get the owner to give you this kind of agreement where you are renting the property and portions of the payment or all of the payment are going to pay down an actual purchase price so that you can eventually own the property outright. It's kind of like an alternative version of seller financing in a way. The reason these kinds of listings end up on foreclosure.com is because either those keywords are showing up somewhere in the description of the property, or when the property was listed by an agent or whoever listed the thing, they actually marked some kind of a checkbox specifically saying this is available as a rent to own. So there is a rhyme and reason as to why these are showing up on foreclosure.com, but again, they're not foreclosures. They just represent potential opportunities. And then one other thing I wanted to show you guys before we wrap this up. So there's a couple of things on these listings that are kind of like hiding in plain sight, or maybe they're not hiding at all, but I didn't see them at first. So if you remember earlier in the video when I mentioned that some of this listing data is coming from auction.com, if it is coming from auction.com, it's actually going to say that in the listing right here over in the right sidebar. So keep that in mind if you're at all interested. And then also these listings do show pretty clearly somewhere in this property information section how many days they've been on the site, so like how old the listing is and how old the information is. As you can see in this example, this one has been on the site for 4 days, and usually the lower this number is, the more reliable that information is. As the guys who run the site explained to me, sometimes what happens is listings will show up here on the site and then the property will sell or something about the status will change. However, they never actually send out the updated data so that foreclosure knows, okay, it's sold, we should take it off the site. So sometimes these listings will be here even though the information is like outdated and not applicable anymore. So sometimes you'll see listings like this here on the site, and somewhere near the top you're going to see a green bar that says this is not an active distressed listing. And the reason they have these on the site is because they weren't told that the property was sold, but they stopped getting information on it. So when that happens, they basically just leave it on the site for about 30 more days and then they remove it. So sometimes you'll see information here that like isn't really current or accurate anymore, but that's why that happens, is because they don't want to take it off if they don't know for a fact that the thing is done for, because sometimes deals can come back or sometimes it's still active and they just don't know any better. And inactive could also mean that like there's a contract on the property but it isn't closed yet. So just a little bit of explanation on that, but that's really the long and the short of it. I know that actually wasn't very short, that was a fairly long video, but I wanted to give you guys a thorough look at this. I know they do have these things called free email alerts, so you can kind of stay on top of the information that you're most interested in on this site. I've not signed up for this myself, but I'm told that's like a super helpful tool and a lot of people use that. And in terms of pricing for this service, we actually do have an affiliate relationship with foreclosure.com. So if you want to get a discount on that, you can go through our affiliate link, and we also earn a really small commission if you go through that link and sign up. That affiliate link is retipster.com/foreclosure. Foreclosure, and I'll include that link beneath this video as well if you want to check it out. No pressure one way or another, but if this is something that interests you, and if this is something you want to jump on top of and take seriously, I mean, it really kind of is like a nice centralized place to find all this information. I know there's plenty of places you can find this information elsewhere, but you'd have to look all over the place. Some of the stuff would be pretty hard and cumbersome to find, and foreclosure just kind of makes it a lot easier if you're actively looking for these types of deals. So if you're interested in that, I hope you found this really helpful, and I hope you learned something one way or another in terms of how this process works. I wish you all the best in your business, and I'll talk to you again soon.